Horror films are both the cheapest films to make, as well as the riskiest films to make. Why so risky? Because it's one of those genres where it's very easy to screw up. I mean, just look at a lot of the horror films that have come out over this past decade alone, and pick out the ones that actually remember being scary, and you'll probably find a greater proportion of horror films that attempted to be scary, but ultimately fell apart. So point being, while again, it's very easy to make horror films, and that's where a lot of filmmakers tend to start, it's one of those things that you have to make sure that all the elements are in the right place, or it won't work. That said, let's get started with this week's episode of Romney's Reviews. Now this film is coming to us from director James Wan, who many of you may recognize as the director of Insidious. So point being, this is kind of riding on the success of Insidious a little bit in terms of the supernatural horror elements. What makes this thing different though is that it's purportedly based on the real-life investigations of Ed and Lorraine Warren, who basically were a duo of paranormal investigators who investigated hauntings in a lot of different places. And that's what this film is based on, a previously sealed case file. Again, you always gotta take claims like that with a grain of salt. Now, the film manages to strike a nice balance between the jump scares and just the general feeling of eeriness. Like, it's not just all, oh, jump scare after jump scare. It has quite a few of them, but at least has it paced in a way that they don't become overwhelming, nor does it break the illusion of the movie that much. It also has a nice sense of general eeriness when it comes to the haunting going on in the house, which is something that's really hard to pull off. I mean, it's easy to just have like low suspense, jump scare, low suspense, low moment, jump scare. Whereas if you're trying to kind of have both jump scares and just that general eerie atmosphere throughout your film, it's a very tough balance to really juggle. I mean, films like The Haunting is a good example of a film that did that really well, where it's not all about having things jump out and go a bloogie woogie woo. It's also just a case where you also have to kind of just keep that general atmosphere looming over the main characters throughout the entire story. And so that's one thing the film did really well. However, one major problem I had with the story is that it kind of, well, felt a little crowded when it came to the focus. I understand you're trying to show the events happening with the Perron family and then showing like how the Warrens learn about everything. But I really think it would have worked out better and would have been more in line with what was advertised if they had devoted more of the focus onto the Warrens and having the Warrens learn the information and having the audience learn the information at the same time the Warrens do, or have the focus be on the Perron family with the Warrens in a much more reduced role. Granted, the latter example would have made the film a little bit weaker, but like I said, if the former was more the case where they devoted more of the focus on the Warrens, it would have been more in line with what I was expecting based on the film's advertisements. But here, they kind of try to keep focus on both, and as such, it makes the beginning feel really, really slow. The reason why I'm mentioning the whole focus should have been on one or the other is because there are certain scenes in the film that, had the film focused entirely on the Warrens, could have worked, but with its current structure, they didn't really add all that much and were really kind of unnecessary. On top of that, there's also some genuinely cheesy moments where you have like, I mean, I understand having kids getting scared by the various like spooky stuff going on, but some of the line delivery from some of the kids, I mean, it's not necessarily their fault, it's just a case that in the scene where they're seeing the thing that terrifies them, and then they're suddenly saying all this information that the so-called ghost had said, in the amount of time that happened, they couldn't have possibly have heard all of that information and would have been able to relay it to their parents. That's something I just found kind of odd. Now, the third thing that I had the biggest problem with was the music. While the music was okay for the most part, let's just say it didn't really allow some of the creepy scenes to really sink in. It was almost kind of afraid that the audience would watch the scene and not get the fact that it's supposed to be scary. It's just kind of a case where it doesn't let the scene sink in long enough before you get a really large, obnoxious musical swell that goes the dun in order to say, hey, this is supposed to be scary, react, be afraid, ooh. And it's just a case where if that music wasn't there, it could have made the scenes work a little bit better because it would have let the eeriness of the situation speak for itself. Those gripes aside, I still found the film pretty enjoyable, and it's definitely one of the better horror films that I've seen this year. Like I mentioned before, the film features decent scares, has pretty likable characters, and a nice sense of atmosphere. On top of that, a lot of the practical effects in this film are also really good. They're kind of on the same level as The Exorcist, sort of. Point being, if you're looking for a good scary film that's actually new and are looking to be kind of freaked out this summer, then, well, this film is definitely a good choice for that, because it actually does a good job. That said, on my personal scale, I give The Conjuring a 4 out of 5. So that's it for this episode of Romney's Reviews. Tune in tomorrow for my review of Red 2. See you then.